The sounds of thunder echoed throughout Adventure Bay, a symbol that the falling rain was not stopping anytime soon. The sky was darkened with gray clouds, doing well to match the tension that seemed to fester throughout the city. Despite the feeling of lingering dread and spiking paranoia, many continued to write off the feeling as just nerves. Being dogs, most of the Paw Patrol had a sudden urge to go out and splash in the rain, kick up mud, and toss a ball around. It was only out of respect for Rocky's fear of water that they chose to stay inside, not wanting to leave him alone. However, Zuma volunteered to venture out in the rain to gather supplies or anything else they'd need. "Does anyone else think rain is oddly relaxing?" Marshall inquired, pressing his paws up against the window. "I always sleep better under it. It's almost hypnotic." "Yeah, it's nice until your kennel floods over." Rocky looked up from his bowl of food. "And you become trapped in a box of wet death." "Water isn't deadly. We need it to live after all." The Dalmatian turned back. "So flash floods don't exist anymore?" "You know what I mean." Being contained to the lookout wasn't entirely demeaning, but one couldn't deny the pups were becoming a tad unhinged from the isolation. Marshall kept longing to be outside. Rocky flinched at each crack of thunder. Rubble kept pacing around. Sky was sneezing and wrapped up in a blanket, and Chase was oddly staring off into space. It seemed odd that the shepherd was wearing his pup pack, but not odd enough to pique the curiosity of everyone else. "Hey, Sky, how are you feeling?" Marshall walked over, seeking to end the bickering with the mixed breed with a new conversation. "Bad," she wheezed. "Like hot and cold at the same time." She pulled the blanket further over herself. The Dalmatian gave a warm smile, laying down on all fours. "Zuma should be back with some snacks soon. Maybe hot chocolate?" "Marshall, we're dogs. We can't have chocolate," Chase said from across the room. "Oh." The spotted dog blinked. "Maybe just something warm then." The overhead barrage of rain was briefly interrupted by a large slice of thunder tearing through the sky, and Rocky visibly jumped for a split second. All heads turned to the mix, and the gray dog bowed his head in shame with a crestfallen expression. Marshall gently moved to his friend's side and patted him sympathetically. No one saw Chase raise an eyebrow at the exchange, watching the two dogs as if he was studying them. "You all right?" asked the Dalmatian. The mix gave a faint shrug. "Just wishing I wasn't a coward all the time." "You're not a coward, though." "Marshall, that is not even the slightest bit true," the mix bit back with a slight attitude. "You saw how I reacted in town the other day when we came up on the roadblock. For someone who went through what you did, I'd say it's justified," Sky chimed in, momentarily looking over. Rocky waved off the comment. "And besides, you all do actual rescues. Chase is the police force, you fight fires and are trained in medical care," he pointed at Marshall. "Zuma was born to live in the one thing I'm deathly afraid of. Sky can fly, and Rubble's the construction pup." "What's so dangerous about construction?" Rubble turned with a confused expression. "I don't know," the mix confessed. "You wear a hard hat, so I assume things can fall on you." The bulldog looked to the side with a shrug. "Well, true, that's why we wear them. But if we follow regulation, it usually doesn't happen. Whatever. I'm just the dog who picks up trash." "Rocky, you're not..." Marshall tried to say. "No, forget it," the mix interrupted. "One day I'll do something worthy." His frown quickly turned into a determined smile, and he puffed out his chest. "One day I'll do something and get a shining medal." "We don't get medals, though," Chase said again in a dry tone. The three of them continued back and forth for a few minutes while Sky tried to drown out the noise. Rubble merely shook his head at the bickering, something he had seen countless times before. He made the decision to stay out of it this time and walked to the window to blankly gaze outside. His eyes fell on a shape moving through the rain, and he jumped up excitedly. "Zuma's back!" Sky looked up in a weary state, and the trifecta of arguing dogs finally divided, much to the others' relief. They gathered around the main elevator as Zuma arrived, Chase noticeably keeping a few paces back. The elevator doors opened, revealing a dripping, soaking wet Labrador dragging a tied plastic bag, and Rocky went wide-eyed. "Everyone, get back!" Rocky called, immediately withdrawing. "Relax, I already shook myself off." Zuma walked in, laughing nervously. Zuma was infamous for a certain prank he loved pulling on the rest of the team. He'd soak himself, either from getting out of water or just leaving a bath, hunt down someone else, and shake the water off with all his puppy-sized might. It was only today they were spared, although his fur was still slightly puffed up from the water. "What did you bring us?" Marshall gleefully wagged his tail, already nosing through the bag. "Treats mostly, and some packages of dog food," the lab nodded. There was a few hints of silence in the air, then everyone suddenly picked up their heads, staring at Zuma in bewilderment. The chocolate lab sat for a few moments, trying to dry himself, then realized everyone was staring at him. "What?" he asked in confusion. "Did you just say treats?" Marshall gawked. "You pronounced the R! You did it perfectly!" Zuma recoiled, slightly red as he was suddenly surrounded. "Yeah, I've been working on it, kinda. I'm not too good at it, though." "But you're doing great! That's amazing!" Rocky wagged his tail, ignoring being so close to the water-coated dog. As everyone showered Zuma in praise, Chase kept back a few feet, scanning the Labrador up and down. It was odd for Zuma to suddenly not have his impediment, and he narrowed his eyes, trying to get a read on his friend. His mind wrung out a splitting noise in his eyes, and he quickly shook his head, shaking the thought away. Of course Zuma would want to mature himself. It wasn't a red flag that something was amiss. The shepherd almost cursed himself for even thinking of such a haunting scenario, but the static in his head wasn't quieting. "I take it the storm wasn't too bad?" Marshall asked as he quickly sniffed out the treats. "It sounds scary out there." "Well, it wasn't too bad," Zuma shrugged. "Most of the roads are flooded, but I could swim through with ease." Rocky rolled his eyes. "You could swim through anything. That's no surprise." "Was everyone else okay out there?" Chase remembered to ask, tilting his head. "The storm must be hitting them hard." "I stopped by Mr. Porter's," the lab explained as Rocky draped a blanket over him. "Most of his phone lines are dead, and his restaurant has some broken windows. We'll have to be sure to help him fix everything up." Rocky nodded. "I just wish we could contact Ryder. I hope our call service fixes up soon." Chase rolled his eyes. "I think we can safely assume we won't have Ryder's help in this." Marshall turned to the police dog, giving him a confused look. "But there's more," Zuma continued. "Mr. Porter seemed..." He looked to the floor a moment, searching for the right word. "Afraid?" "He didn't want to come outside, so I just met him at the door. I thought he was scared of the rain, but it was something else." Sky and Marshall picked their heads up, going wide-eyed and bearing their full attention. Rocky stepped back, fear flooding his face as he prepared for the worst. The mixed breed had already been through enough. He wasn't looking forward to another disaster. Rubble merely raised an eyebrow, curious about Zuma's information. Chase slowly got up and began gently circling the group, flicking his gaze around each dog. "He didn't want to tell me at first. All he said was just to get home and lock myself in," he said, licking his paw. "But I kept pressing him and he eventually told me. Apparently, someone died." The group shot backward in alarm. "From the storm?" Rocky cried. "No, it's something different." Zuma shook his head, and Chase tilted his head, taking a step closer. "He told me about sounds he was hearing outside when he was going around the store and locking everything down. He thought a pup was crying to be let in, so he trekked outside in the rain to try to help." "Oh no!" Marshall whimpered, visibly fearful. "But there wasn't anything, just a trail of blood that led away." Sky withdrew into her blanket. "Zuma, please stop with the horror stories." "It's not a story," Zuma protested. "Porter tried to follow it, but he turned back when the trail led into the forest." Zuma's final words cut into Chase, nearly making him lose his balance. The voices of the others quickly died away as Chase felt sick, having to turn his head away in case he suddenly started vomiting. Horror spewed over him as his mind flashed image after image, screaming noise after noise. It was the forest, Zuma had said, that the supposed blood trail had vanished into. Such a location was not far from Chase's secret weapon bunker, putting this possible murderer closer to the Paw Patrol than he'd like to imagine. None of the others knew of Farak's malice. None of his friends were aware of the horrible danger. For the killer to disappear in close range of the lookout, it could only mean one thing. "Please, no," Chase slightly pleaded, too low for anyone to hear. The more ways he tried to reason with himself, the louder his head screeched out in static. He couldn't wait any longer. He had to be sure right here and right now. If things went south, he was still carrying his concealed weapon in his pup pack. All he needed was to take control of the situation. "I'll be right back," he suddenly called out, and everyone turned their heads. "Wait, you're going out there?" Rocky exclaimed. "Into the storm? Are you crazy?" "Chase, you'll get sick out there," Marshall tried to reason, giving a low whine. The police dog merely pushed past them all. "I just need to get something." The remaining 5 looked in confusion as the elevator doors closed, and Chase descended down into the storm outside. "What's he on about?" Rubble muttered, then drew back as Sky let out a sneeze. "Not sure," Marshall shrugged, "but he's been on edge since that mission of ours got interrupted." Rocky hung his head at the statement, a tired expression on his face. "Please do not remind me of that experience." "It's true, though," the Dalmatian nodded, thinking over the past few days. "I wonder if he's hiding something." The air turned tense as Marshall's suggestion hit the air, faint mutters among the group. It seemed unlike Chase to deceive them, yet none could deny there was a sliver of possibility. "Why don't we just ask him?" Sky stood up. "Confront him directly." "If I was being lied to, I'd want to know," Zuma nodded. "Let's do it." "Here he comes." Rocky pointed out the window, already looking irritated himself. It was already an explosive week. The thought of a friend going behind his back would only ruin it even more for him. All heads turned as Chase emerged from the elevator doors, soaking wet and carrying a small bag. "Chase," Rocky began, although took a step back from the puddles the shepherd was causing. "Can we ask you something?" "Not yet," the police dog denied, then set down the bag. "Well, it's just..." Marshall looked to the floor. "You haven't really been around lately, and why are you wearing your pup pack?" The shepherd merely shrugged off the question. "No reason." He began nosing through the bag, revealing a small handheld device. "Hey, I need you guys to do something for me." "What is that?" Zuma squinted at the small device. Chase picked up the device in his mouth and looked out to his friends. "I promise this will be quick and easy. I just need your blood." Silence. Chase stood there awkwardly as all 5 dogs recoiled in shock, Marshall's mouth agape. The shepherd gave a small sigh, knowing this wouldn't be easy, but it was all for the greater good. All he needed was solid proof that nothing was hiding inside them, and maybe the static screaming in his head would finally clear away. A solid few seconds went by before someone spoke up. "You want our what?" Sky questioned, a dumbfounded look on her face. "Why the hell do you want us to bleed?" Rocky stepped back further. Both Marshall and Zuma barked questions of their own, but they spoke at the same time, and their words overlapped. Rubble was frozen in shock, flicking his eyes around to try and understand the situation. Chase tried to answer them one at a time, but could barely get a word out before an uproar began. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Rocky barked again, ears flattened. "Rocky, wait." Chase tried to control the situation. "You vanish for hours at a time and come back with this?" Zuma bristled, his fur beginning to spike. "Why would you even say that?" As he was pelted with more questions, Chase was growing increasingly stressed, and hostility of his own was beginning to flare. His ears flattened down as he nearly bared his teeth. "Can you just let me explain what this is?" "Fine, please explain," Sky snapped, and everyone held their tongues. Chase furiously searched for an easy way to put it. "I need you all to take a blood test." "Why?" the cockapoo demanded. "Because to make sure nothing is hiding inside you," the shepherd snapped, baring his teeth, then instantly drew back as he realized what he had just said. The situation had not been made any easier just then. Expressions of horror spread among his friends. "Why the fuck would something be hiding inside us?" Sky snarled. "Are you out of your mind?" Chase shook his head, trying to hold Sky's gaze. "No, listen to me. I've been talking to the ACG." "What?" Rocky erupted. "What do you mean you've been talking? Can everyone just listen to me?" The shepherd had to bark over the commotion. "I know why they're here. There's a creature loose in the city, and they tasked me with..." "Tasked?" Sky echoed. "You're taking orders from them now? Whose side are you on?" The friendly atmosphere of the lookout was long gone. Between the 6 dogs, a furious shouting match had begun and was quickly rising. Chase was surrounded by 5 dogs who all demanded answers. "You're not listening! I'm trying to help all of us by siding with savages!" Marshall demanded. "After what they did to Rocky?" "Okay, that was wrong. I can see that." "Oh, that was wrong," Sky pointed out. "You admit that one time was wrong, but completely siding with them isn't?" "Sky, there is a creature loose in Adventure Bay!" "Oh, that is complete and utter bullshit!" Rocky snarled, jumping forward to join the argument. "Did they tell you that?" "They showed me the photos," Chase protested. "I've seen it! It's a monster that can hide inside other living things. That's why I need your blood for the test." "But why would you keep this from us?" Sky pleaded, deeply hurt inside. "I had to," he argued. "It was a confidential agreement, but that's all. There are no other secrets." "No other secrets?" Zuma now joined in. "How about we talk about you keeping a massive room of loaded weapons in the forest?" All dogs reared back in even further surprise. At this point, they could barely believe what they were hearing. Upon realizing Zuma had just broken their secret, Chase exploded in rage. Zuma! He snarled furiously. You said you'd keep that between us! You have a room of loaded weapons? Marshall exclaimed with a fearful expression. I thought it was just a normal friend between friend kind of secret. The lab barked angrily. But clearly you're keeping us from something. Don't drag me into your lies. I'm not lying! Chase yelled, flexing his claws as his fur bristled. I went there to get a weapon. I need one. Why the living hell do you need a weapon? Sky got up, now approaching Chase. The shepherd instantly backed up to the wall, as if Sky was hostile and trying to provoke him. It all made sense. Everything made sense, and it only made him angrier. Without a doubt, one of his friends was infected. Otherwise, they wouldn't be acting like this. It was so obvious that Chase was in the right. Everyone knew how much he sacrificed to keep Adventure Bay safe. It was their own fault if they infringed on his progress. The white noise that impeded through his mind finally began to take shape, quieting down the static and giving Chase faint hope in his decision. He was now fully confident that the killer was in front of him. He just had to know who. You get away from me! Chase warned, snarling his teeth. All of you, get away! Sky's hostility didn't falter, and she merely pressed forward. What? Why? Chase, I'm just asking a reasonable question. The shepherd flicked his eyes to each dog before him, trying to furiously read each one. His teeth were clenched together, his ears so flat against his head that it gave the impression he didn't have any. He surveyed each one, his pupils narrowing as an almost feral instinct took over his mind. Marshall's horrified expression, Rocky's defensive stance, Zuma's angered expression, Rubble's look of concern, and Sky, whom he knew was challenging him. The static, the noise, and the screaming in his head erupted into a symphony of agony that overpowered any other sound that could enter his ears. Rough! Ammunition! Chase barked the command, and the mechanical arm shot out of his pup pack, carrying the semi-auto pistol. Oh my god! Rocky jumped, streaming backward. Chase, why do you have that? Sky's hostility immediately shut off as she recoiled back in horror. Zuma went wide-eyed and almost froze in place. Rocky instinctively jumped in front of Marshall. Chase, have you lost it? Which one? Chase snarled, now aiming the gun around. I know it's one of you! Marshall fell to the floor and covered his face, already beginning to cry. The mixed breed above him firmly stood his ground as everyone else now tried their hardest to reassure the shepherd. Dude, calm down! Zuma pleaded, holding his paws up. Let's just take a deep breath. Why can't you suddenly speak perfectly? Chase whipped around to the lab. Why, Zuma? Why are you magically able to pronounce words suddenly? That's not you! What are you talking about? The lab drew back. I told you, I've been working on that! And you! The shepherd snapped his head towards Sky. You've been sick for at least 2 weeks! Why now? Sky held a paw up defensively, but still tried to take a step forward. I don't know, Chase! I don't know the answers to your questions! Of course you don't, he growled. No, I'm just as clueless as you are, she tried to say reassuringly. Let's just all calm down, and we can figure all these things out. I am not clueless, Chase snapped. I know what's going on, and don't try to think you know more than me! We didn't say that, Sky replied, trying to defuse the shepherd. We haven't said anything like that. Please put the gun down. No! Snarled the police dog. I know it's one of you! Chase, you're scaring Marshall! Rocky shouted, putting a paw on the quivering Dalmatian. Look, Chase. Sky tried to reason, moving toward her close friend while she tried to keep her voice from shaking.
Just look at me.
The armed dog snapped his gaze to her, a wild and detached look in his constricted pupils.
You're right, she said slowly. You're right. There's something wrong here, and the best way to find it is if we take it slowly. So I'm coming over to you, and we're going to put the gun down, okay?
She stared at him with a desperate look in her eyes.
You can trust me.
Trust? What was trust anymore? What was trust when any one of your friends could have something terrible hidden inside them? He knew what Sky was doing. He knew what it was doing. It was trying to disarm him, and if it gained the upper hand, every single one of his beloved friends would die. He couldn't let that happen. Chase gave a bristling look at Sky, wordlessly writhing in his own mind.
Chase,
Sky said softly, moving forward. The shepherd instantly brought the gun forward and pulled the trigger. Ah! The deafening sound of a gunshot screamed throughout the tower, prompting a cry from Marshall as the rest fell to the floor and covered their heads. Chase shut his eyes from the noise, his ears ringing from the piercing sound. Around 2 seconds went by, and Chase slowly opened his eyes and centered his vision on the dead body that now lay in the tower. The rest of the dogs also began to slowly come to, shaking away the ringing in their ears and opening their eyes. One by one, horror reared among them as they all laid eyes on the bloodied body sitting on the floor. In that second, all of the static in Chase's head suddenly cleared, and his mind returned to a state of calm, although his heart was pounding. Looking before him, his heart sunk to the darkest depths, a sickening feeling boiling in his stomach. His ferocity and feral drive quickly vanished, and Chase stared in horror at what he had done.